Hey folks, it's Coach Patrick here from Endurance Nation. I want to welcome you to another installment of our weekly office hours, weekly check-in with me here on Facebook Live. Part of our mission inside Endurance Nation is built around education, is built around making sure that our athletes are as smart as they are fast, and there's totally a correlation between speed and intelligence. Right, so we have races that we do as endurance events. The longer those events are, the higher degree of intelligence is required, and not simply because I'm pretty sure there's like a loss of IQ over time, right? Like every hour you continue moving at a steady effort, you lose several IQ points, and that only just gets worse and worse and worse as we go down the event curve. So you need a lot of IQ when you start. But also because getting better at endurance events means getting better at iterating, right? Finding new paths, new means of improving. That's the excitement for me. That's the excitement for many athletes like yourself who are constantly trying to not just reinvent the wheel, but find a better version, right? So I can run, but if I can do my run training better, then I'll be faster, right? If I'm 5 pounds overweight and I can lose those 5 pounds, I'm that much faster, right? I'm that much healthier. So what are the means through which we make these changes? This week's theme, I'm going to talk a little bit about testing. The topic today, test early, test often. And this is sort of a touchy subject for a lot of athletes. We have an ego. We have an athletic identity that's built around performance. And those performances are manifested in race T-shirts, in medal collections, in maybe some pictures you've got around your house or whatever. I've got a couple of pictures right here on my wall. I'm totally huge ego right here. Totally going to admit it. And that ego is built around this understanding of who you are. Testing is an objective look at who you are, where you are, right? And for many of us as athletes with that sort of outsized ego or the desire to not sort of rip off the Band-Aid and look at the problem, don't want to test because we don't want to see where we're at. We don't want to have that argument with like who we think we are and where we are right now. We're just like, everything's fine. I'm just as fast as I want to be. I'm just as strong as I need to be. I don't need to look at anything. I don't need to do anything. I'm just fine. The challenge with that becomes that as we start to move forward and make decisions, you're making decisions based on hypothetical scenarios about yourself. It could be historical. We're lucky if you're using some historical information. Last year, I did this, and so this year I'm going to do that again, or this plus one, or a little change. Maybe that makes enough of a delta for you that keeps you on track. But if you're not testing, you're missing out on the precision related to your training that can really make the difference between old you and new you. And I say that because not just because it's the new year and people are reinventing themselves with different strategies and different goals, but also because remember, each year, each race, each training cycle is an opportunity to kind of get back to basics and build in some fundamentals that are going to help set you free. And this week, I want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of testing and the idea that testing can actually set you free. That testing isn't a problem, but testing is instead an opportunity. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about testing. What kind of testing do I mean? Do I mean, getting in your car and going to university and booking an appointment and, wearing tons of equipment and submerging yourself underwater and salt water? I have no idea what those tests are. No, I'm talking about functional tests. So functional tests are tests that you can do on your own. So it could be in our world inside Endurance Nation, it's a test on the bike. It's a 5-minute, 20-minute test on the bike. It's a 5K run outside. It's a 1K swim or a 10 by 100 meter swim. Are they the perfect tests? No. Are they lab accurate? Meh. But they are your work. They are your data, and they are repeatable. You can run that same 5K loop around your house. If I told you to run it again tomorrow, you could because it's right there. You didn't have to travel to another city to do a special race or go to someone's lab to do a thing. I'm not saying anything's wrong with those tests. However, I am saying that the need to be able to frequently measure your data in many ways trumps the need for you to actually go somewhere and get that high-end data analysis, right? If it's not something that's readily at your disposal, like an elite athlete or pro athlete, it's just not that useful to you. Fortunately for you, the means to which we measure our fitness has improved drastically in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, insane, right? We can measure everything from your power output on the bike to predicted-ish power on the run to also getting into, things we can monitor your sleep patterns. We can monitor your heart rate variability. We can monitor core body temperature. We can do all sorts of things that give us tons and tons of data. the more information we have about you, the better. Not that we're constantly using all this data, but rather we have the data when we need to use it, right? So we're just going to kind of get in there. We're going to turn all the dials. We're going to turn a bunch of sensors on. We're going to leave it on. So we come back and say, what happened in the 4th week of January? We can go back and we can look at heart rate. We can look at sleep patterns. We can look at your power on the bike. We can look at the paces you are running on the run. We could look even at the weather and say, wow, how do these things affect? And you could say, look, I'm actually, it turns out, super stressed, end of the month, unable to get enough sleep. Sleep disruptions is what really sort of cut my workout out. So that data, that information becomes critical. Testing is a little more removed from that, and that testing falls into more of a milestone section of kind of how we think about what our year looks like. And I'll talk a little bit about that, right now as I kind of go through the process with you. So here we go. We're going to go over to Coach Patrick's Evo whiteboard, and we're going to dive in a little bit to that. So hope you enjoy it. So we think about our year, kind of based out in what a total season looks like. And we've got, essentially where we are now and where we want to end up. I say A, B simply because I think about them as two binary states. There's you where you are now, and there's B where you want to be. Very simple, right? As we move along this path, there's different trajectories that we follow. But the way that Endurance Nation works that I think is really helpful for you to visualize is that there's several blocks across the course of your season, okay? And each of these blocks has a different purpose. In our out season block, for example, we're doing lots of high intensity work, but we're doing very little time. In our swim camp block, we're doing very little training here, but we're starting to do a little bit of flexibility work. So we're starting to add in some other stuff at the top of the equation. In our specificity block here, in block number 3, specificity block, we're diving into a single sport, and we're doing both. We're doing both the high end, and we're starting to build up some of this intensity. We're kind of bringing these two forces together, but we're doing it around one discipline, right? And that's really challenging. So we really kind of challenge you to be strong on the run, strong on the bike, etc. And then we move into the more volume-oriented part of your year when we say, where do we want to go from here? And in this case, this last portion of the season, revolves a great deal around, training time. It revolves a great deal around the intensity. I want to call it. We're just going to call it sort of the steady intensity, right? We look at like that. So we're kind of building different energy systems across a full season to say which way we're going to work. And each of these milestones along the way becomes an important part of how we think about our fitness. And the key for us with this part is that at each of these sections here, we kind of have to have a check-in to say, where am I? What's happening with my fitness right now? Where's my body? How am I responding to this training load? And am I doing the work that I need to be doing so that I can continue on to be successful as I'm moving through the process of going through my season? All right, so we're going to kind of pick up here. Sorry for the friction there, folks. And so I talked earlier about the season, and we talked about what it means to kind of have these different blocks in our year, right? So we've got these different points in our year where we say, hey, there's different milestones, right? At each one of these different milestones, we have a different level of fitness. And what's really important is that each area here, we're doing some baseline testing. So you could easily say that in a standard season, we have a total of 5 different testing opportunities, really 4, and the 5th kind of being sort of the race scenario. Some people go a little less. So for example, you might have something here where we say, okay, this is my standard test that I'm doing beginning of the year. This is the test I do at the end of my first block to see how I'm doing. This is the test that I do at mid-season, kind of make sure that I'm on the right path I'm walking. And then the remainder of the tests kind of fall more into that real world scenario. Like, hey, I'm doing a half marathon. I'm doing an actual simulation for a race event itself. So these tests don't necessarily compare one-to-one. You can't exactly go back and forth between the two, here and say, I can't really compare, this test and this test. That's not really going to work between those two because at the end of the day, we're looking at different data as a number. But that's fine because we don't need to test those. What we're really concerned about is making sure that what we've got going on here and these 3 early data points is really what we want. So as the volume is going up, as our intensity is dynamically changing across the course of a season, and we're trying to get, both a combination of work dialed in terms of total stress time, but also work as a function of intensity as related to your events. We need to be able to understand across these 3 time points, where are you improving? So the test periods that we have, generally speaking, for the season are pretty straightforward. And I just want to run through them with you really quickly. So when I think about testing for each part of the season testing falls into the categories where we say, all right, we want to go ahead, we want to test at the beginning of your season. So those of you doing the January out season who started right now, it's test week, baby. I recommend you test. You can guess from a recent event, but I recommend you test if you don't have the numbers and you don't know for sure. We're going to test again in 14 weeks. The test at the end of the out season. We test during the out season as well. You test twice, week 5 and week 10, but you're going to test again at the out season as well. And we're going to, as always, reimagine our numbers and refocus our numbers based on that. Okay. And then we move into the rest of the season, and then you'll test again as you're able. The only caveat I have there, of course, is that sometimes your tests are indoors because of the winter, and sometimes your tests are outdoors. So we have to be a little mindful. The bike, you can always test indoors because most of you can put it on a trainer. The run becomes a little sketchy. And obviously, of course, the course of the season, we're doing more and more race-specific type testing, as I mentioned earlier, when we talked about what it meant to do, these different tests, the real-world tests here in the blue versus the normal functional testing that we have early in the season, which is much more of a controlled environment. We can kind of follow that. So I want to talk about what the testing utilization is for the numbers. Okay, so people will test at the beginning of the year. The first test is always the worst. And especially if you're new to the team or new to the testing experience, the first test is just hard because you just don't know what it is you're getting into. The second and third tests are mentally hard because you know exactly what you're getting into and you still got to do it, right? But the important part to remember here is not that you're scoring on a test. Like, we're not trying to score 100 or trying to be at the top of the class. The goal here is just to really find out where you are. We're effectively taking a look. We'll head back over to the map here so we kind of get a sense of of what we're talking about. Hold on a second here. And hold on a second. All right. All the technical issues today. My apologies for this. All right, so we're going to head back over to the whiteboard section here. All right. In this regard, when people think about testing, again, like I mentioned, they kind of think of it as being on some kind of a scale, So they're saying to themselves like, hey, I'm trying to, I'm basically, this is the lowest point I can be, this is the top point I can be, and there's all these markers in between, right? And they're going to say, where do I end up on my test? And they say, hey, I did my my bike test, and I ended up right here. Last year I was definitely, I was a little bit higher. Last year was awesome up here, but that's okay. Like, the gap between, here and there is pretty slim. We can kind of quantify this and say, hey, I'm 10% off. That's no problem. I can close the gap on my 10%. But I don't think about testing that way. And I really encourage you to not think about testing that way either. Instead, I think about testing, more as taking a look at a map. Okay. And this map has all sorts of stuff on it. Some people like to think of it like sort of as a road that kind of goes through the course of the season and so on, and says like, hey, here's my point A, here's my point B. My B is my desired path. That's where I want to end up. This is where I'm at. And for those of you out there asking, no, this is not reverse hilly KOM and Watopia at all. I'm not repeatedly drawing that on a map. But when I think about this kind of process, what's really important about this, and what I like about the map concept, is that it really kind of shows the complexity of the path that you're walking. The plan is simple. The work that you do is simple. The ritual you do daily is simple, but the outcomes are not. And testing helps us accurately determine exactly where you are in this process. So when I think about this process and we test in your beginning of your season, some people might test and their fitness is here. And I say, oh, hold on a second. I figured that, based on last year's number, this is where you'd be. This is where your numbers would be. Now I see you're kind of all the way over on the left bottom hand side of the map. That's something different that I want to do with you, right? Just like I would show up if someone shows up to me and says, Coach, I want to be an Ironman finisher. I want to be super competitive. But here are a couple things about me you need to know. I was a competitive D2 swimmer. I can swim, 110, 100s meters long course in the pool with my eyes closed. When I get an athlete like that, I'm not worried about swimming. I will swim, but I'm not worried about swimming. Instead, I can focus my energy on doing other stuff with them, right? Similarly, when I get test results that show me where you are from a data perspective, that allows me as a coach and you as a self-coached athlete to make a better set of decisions about where to place our energy. If we know that you need to run 8-minute miles in your half Ironman to be successful, and your test already has you running 7:15s at that high-end pace, you're on the 8s already. Eights are great. We're in a great place with the eights. I do not need to step on the gas for the run. I can instead redirect my energy to the bike, right? Similarly speaking, if your test is not where you want it to be, right? If we go back to the happy graph time here, and we say, you know what, in this case, my test, it turns out, we're going to make you yellow, but it turns out my test data is here. I was, 2020 sucked. 2020 was a dumpster fire of a year. I put on weight. I didn't do any exercising. I couldn't even find my bicycle. And this test was really, really bad. Right. So in this case, we've got a different set of work that needs to be done. As a coach, I've got to do a fair amount of sort of mental strategy with this athlete to get them back on track, to help them build some confidence, because we haven't lost all fitness. A test is not just a measure of fitness. After all, it's a test of execution of the test, right? Just like people who want to do well on the SAT or the PSAT, the GMAT, GRE, they take test prep courses if they're fortunate enough, privileged enough to have money and time. And so they get better at taking the test. As you test, you get better at taking the test. And if you're not fit, you show up woefully underprepared and you will suffer in the test. But that doesn't mean that you're in a bad space. It just means that you're in a different place. So in this case, you look at that linearly and you as the athlete say, look where I am on this thing. This is awful. I am the worst ever. Like this, I've never been so low. I've got such a high journey. Is really 6 months enough to train? The answer is yes. Because you're looking at it like that in a linear perspective. I, as your coach, I'm looking at it like this, and I'm saying, hey, that's actually not so bad. If you really get down to it at the end of the day, right? Look at this. I'm going to bust out some hot pink action. We're in the same vertical in Coach Patrick's world. Okay. Coach Patrick says, we're in the same spot. I just see that you're on the right-hand side of the page and not the left-hand side of the page. You are looking at this thing and you're saying, oh my God, coach, I'm not anywhere near, I'm not even close to 3/4 or 2/3. I'm below 50%. This is awful. I just gave myself an F testing. I'm out of here. And the answer is nowhere nearly as simple as that. Instead, I look at it from a map perspective. I want to identify where you are on a map, and that allows me to make better decisions, just like it can allow you to make better decisions about energy, time, and utilization. So once we have that test data, where do we go from there? Okay. So very quickly, just last couple minutes, I'll talk about this. When you have your test numbers, what do we do? Inside Endurance Nation and wherever you work, whether you work with a coach, you work on your own, we take those test numbers and we update our training zones. Now we work on Final Surge. Final Surge is a great process and super easy to use interface that allows us to update our training zones on the fly. So we can go ahead and just move forward and use all new zones, whether they're up or they're down. Those are our zones. I recommend people take about a week or so to get used to the new zones. So don't schedule like a super hard workout the day after you test with all brand new zones. That's not going to work out so well because it's a change in process. It's a change in mental approach. If you've moved up, and then you've got to do more work and it's harder. We need longer warm-ups. It's going to be mentally tougher. It could be a difficult transition. If you move down, it's almost equally as challenging for you to pace yourself properly relative to where you want to be. You've got a number where you need to be, and there's a number where you want to be. And if we want to do the stuff that you want to do on race day at the end of the journey, all the way up in the top corner there at the B, then we've got to make sure we're doing the right things now, the right inputs, which is what that test data is for. So wherever you fall, we need a little bit of, so I would say sort of rubber band room. If you've been fortunate enough to have a big gap, a big delta, if your pace went from 9-minute miles to 8:40 miles, and you're like, that's 20 seconds per mile faster, that's going to be a lot harder. And I told people in that first week, just have the distance. Go 850s, right? So you went from 9s to 840s. Let's go 850s for a week, and then we'll go 840s next week. Just give yourself a little bit of time to adjust to the process, right? The important part is that we're always testing at the beginning part of each phase so we can set the tone and start off right. And it's important to build in this habit now because as we move to later in the season and the stakes get higher and things get more connected to your race, we can't afford to have you 5 or 10% off of your zones when you're doing 10, 12, 18, 20 hours of training. The cost of being in the wrong zone becomes exponentially higher later in the season. So take the time now early in the season to do it right. Test early, test often. If you Google Endurance Nation and functional testing, you'll find information on how we test on the bike, how we test on the run, and how we test on the swim. If you've got questions for me, you can go ahead and put them on our Facebook page or head over to endurancestation.us, use the red chat button at the bottom, and shoot me a question right in there. I'll be sure to answer it. Give me a day or so to get back to you. We can talk a little bit more about functional testing for you, what numbers we want to use relative to the event that you've chosen, what time of year it is, and how we can use those numbers to make better and smarter decisions as you iterate across the year, choosing the right workouts to get you ready for your big day. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate everyone stopping by. I hope you enjoyed the video. The drawings, I have to admit, the drawings aren't getting any better, but I'm using color now. So, hey, what could possibly go wrong? So I hope you enjoyed my renderings of what it means to move through a season, and you've changed your perspective a little bit about just higher is better, but rather knowing where you are is the most important next step. Okay, folks, have a great week. I'll see you next Friday. See ya.